Welcome back to Decoding Dynasty, the only place where we dig through history's DNA like it's the world's most complicated Ancestry.com result. Today, we're diving headfirst, pun absolutely intended, you'll see why, into the fascinating and frankly somewhat soggy story of Emperor Ferdinand I of Austria. Picture this, you're the top dog of a massive empire, but your head's a little, shall we say, roomy on the inside, thanks to something called hydrocephalus. And to top it off, your brain throws more surprise parties, aka seizures, than a toddler with a drum set. Born into the Habsburgs, a family tree so intertwined you practically needed a genetic map just to figure out who was related to whom. Spoiler alert, everyone was. Ferdinand inherited the throne in 1835 and also became the top monarch in Hungary and Bohemia. Now, history paints him as, well, history isn't always kind, and Ferdinand's reign is often painted with the broad brush of indecisive and not exactly a political powerhouse. Some even nicknamed him Ferdinand the Good-Natured, which, in royal circles, can sometimes be code for a bit out to lunch. But was he truly simple-minded, or was there more to the man whose head was, shall we say, carrying a little extra brain beverage due to hydrocephalus? And that's just the beginning of our medical mystery. Poor Ferdinand also had epilepsy that threw more surprise parties in his brain than a confetti factory on overdrive. We're talking up to 20 seizures a day. Imagine trying to run an empire when your own neurological system is staging a daily revolt. You'd probably need a really good nap, or, to abdicate, which he eventually did amidst the chaos of 1848. So, what's the genetic tea here? Well, Ferdinand's parents were first cousins. Yes, you heard that right. Actually, his parents were double first cousins, which in the genetic lottery is like buying all the tickets for the rare and slightly inconvenient health conditions draw. So, was Ferdinand's less than stellar reign down to bad luck, or did his family's penchant for keeping it all in the family genetically load the dice? Their family get-togethers must have been genetically cozy. This level of consanguinity significantly ups the odds of recessive genetic quirks popping up, kind of like finding unexpected treasures, or, in Ferdinand's case, unexpected health challenges in the family attic. And in this episode of Decoding Dynasty, we will delve deeper into the medical conditions of hydrocephalus and the electrifying chaos of epilepsy. Through the lens of modern science, we'll try to piece together if the Habsburgs' fondness for marrying within the family might explain Ferdinand's unique set of challenges. Get ready for a historical autopsy with a genetic twist. All right, so Emperor Ferdinand I was dealing with a double whammy: hydrocephalus and epilepsy. Now, these two might sound like they're in the same brainy ballpark, but they're actually playing different games, even if they sometimes share the field. Let's break down what's similar, what's different, and where things get a little complicated. What's kind of the same-ish? Brain stuff. Bottom line, both hydrocephalus and epilepsy are brain-related. They're not like a tummy ache or a bad hair day, they mess with the control center, and both can seriously impact someone's life. Brain acting weird. Both conditions can lead to some not-so-normal brain behavior. Hydrocephalus can cause seizures. Yep, epilepsy's main gig, plus things like delays and trouble moving. Epilepsy? Well, it's all about those surprise brain misfires we call seizures, but it can also mess with thinking and behavior over time. Early brain development issues. If either of these kicks in early in life, it can throw a wrench in how the brain grows and learns. Sometimes they hang out together. Interestingly, in some really tough genetic conditions that mess with brain development big time, you can see both hydrocephalus and epilepsy showing up. It's like some genetic mutations are just extra chaotic and cause all sorts of problems. Brain structure gone wrong. Sometimes, if the brain doesn't form quite right in the first place, it can set the stage for both hydrocephalus and epilepsy. So a bumpy start can lead to a bumpy brain experience later on. Where they go, they're separate ways. The plumbing versus the wiring. Think of it this way. Hydrocephalus is more of a plumbing problem. It's about the fluid in your brain, cerebrospinal fluid or CSF, not flowing or draining properly, causing backup and pressure. Epilepsy, on the other hand, is more like an electrical wiring issue. It's about the brain cells firing off in a haywire way, causing those seizures. Different genetic players. While there are a few rare genetic overlaps, mostly hydrocephalus and epilepsy have their own sets of bad guy genes. Hydrocephalus genes tend to be about brain development, cell signals, and these little hair-like things called cilia that help move fluid. Epilepsy genes are often about how brain cells get excited or calm down, things like ion channels and how signals get passed between neurons. Different brain roadmaps gone wrong. Developmentally, hydrocephalus is usually about the brain's fluid system not forming or working right. Epilepsy is more about how the brain cells organize themselves, connect, and fire signals. Where they bump into each other. Seizures, the uninvited guest in hydrocephalus. Here's a twist. Sometimes if you've got hydrocephalus, all that extra fluid and pressure can irritate the brain and cause seizures. So, epilepsy can be a side effect of hydrocephalus. The something's really wrong scenario. When you see both hydrocephalus and epilepsy together, it often points to a more severe underlying genetic or developmental issue that's really throwing the brain for a loop. Shunt surprises. And get this, sometimes the surgery to fix hydrocephalus, putting in a shunt to drain the fluid, has been linked to more seizures in some people. It's still a bit of a medical head-scratcher why that happens. Wrapping up this brain teaser. So while hydrocephalus and epilepsy can be buddies in some tough situations, they're generally caused by different things going wrong in the brain. One's a fluid flow problem, the other's an electrical storm. Understanding this helps us get a better picture of what Emperor Ferdinand I might have been up against. So, for today's episode, we're really going to dig deep into the world of epilepsy and its connection to Ferdinand. Don't worry, we haven't forgotten about his other big medical mystery, hydrocephalus. That's getting its very own episode next time. We'll give it the full Decoding Dynasty treatment. So we know epilepsy can be a real challenge, and for many, the story starts with their genes. Epilepsy isn't usually caused by just one rogue gene. It's more like a complex genetic puzzle with lots of different pieces scattered across our 23 pairs of chromosomes. But what do we know about where these pieces are located and how they get passed down? Well, the genetics of epilepsy are super diverse. We're talking about a vast number of genes that have been linked to different forms of epilepsy, residing on various chromosomes throughout our genome. What's wild is that most of the time, it's not a simple case of you have the gene on chromosome X, you get epilepsy. It's often more complicated, involving multiple genes interacting with each other and sometimes even with things in the environment. This is what we call genetically heterogeneous, meaning lots of different genetic changes on different parts of our DNA can lead to similar outcomes. However, there are some rarer forms of epilepsy where it's a bit more straightforward, following what we call Mendelian inheritance patterns. You know, like those Punnett squares from high school biology. These are often caused by a mutation in a single specific gene located on a particular chromosome. Now, when we talk about how these genes get passed down and where they hang out on our genetic map, it can vary. Autosomal dominant. Imagine you have two copies of each gene, one from each parent, located on chromosomes 1 through 22, the autosomes. With autosomal dominant inheritance, you only need one faulty copy of a specific epilepsy-related gene to potentially develop the condition. For example, mutations in the SCN2A gene, often found on chromosome 2q24, have been linked to genetic epilepsy with febrile seizures plus GFs+. If one of your parents has this gene, there's a 50-50 chance you might inherit it too. Autosomal recessive. In this case, you need two faulty copies of the gene, one from each parent, located on one of the autosomes to have the condition. For instance, mutations in the TSC1 and TSC2 genes found on chromosomes 9q34 and 16p13.3 respectively, and involved in tuberous sclerosis, follow this pattern for the epilepsy associated with that condition. If you only inherit one copy, you're usually just a carrier. X-linked. Some epilepsy genes are located on the X chromosome, the sex chromosome. The inheritance pattern here can be a bit different for males and females. Males only have one X chromosome, so if they inherit a faulty X-linked gene, they're more likely to show the condition. For example, mutations in the PCDH19 gene on chromosome XQ22.1 are associated with a specific type of epilepsy in females. De novo mutations. Sometimes a genetic change happens spontaneously in an individual's DNA on any chromosome and isn't inherited from either parent. These de novo, meaning new mutations, can be a significant cause of some epilepsy syndromes, especially the more severe ones that pop up early in life. Genes like STXBP1 on chromosome 9q34.11 are often implicated in early-onset epileptic encephalopathies due to de novo mutations. Think back to Ferdinand I. His parents were double first cousins, which significantly increased the chances of him inheriting 2 copies of a recessive gene located on any of his autosomes that might contribute to his health issues, including his epilepsy. When families are closely related, there's a higher likelihood of sharing the same regions of DNA, including any rare, potentially problematic genes. So, while pinpointing the exact gene and its location for Ferdinand without his genetic information is impossible, understanding the diverse genetic landscape and the chromosomal neighborhoods where epilepsy-related genes reside helps us appreciate the complexity of this condition and its potential inheritance patterns. One of the major players in the genetic story of epilepsy is a group of genes that code for ion channels. Think of these channels as tiny gates in the membranes of our brain cells, specifically neurons. These gates control the flow of electrically charged particles, ions like sodium, potassium, and calcium, in and out of the cells. This precise flow of ions is absolutely crucial for neurons to fire electrical signals, which is how our brain communicates. Now, when there's a mutation in an ion channel gene, it can mess up how these gates work. The gate might open too easily, a gain-of-function mutation, stay open for too long, close too slowly, or it might not open properly at all, a loss-of-function mutation. These subtle changes at the molecular level can have a big impact on how excitable our brain cells are, and if that excitability gets out of whack, it can lead to seizures, the hallmark of epilepsy. What's really fascinating and what contributes to the huge variety we see in epilepsy is that the same type of mutation in different ion channel genes, or even different mutations within the same gene, can lead to very different clinical pictures, what we call phenotype variability. Let's look at some examples. Take the SCN1A gene, located on chromosome 2q24.3. This gene gives instructions for making a sodium channel. Loss-of-function mutations in SCN1A are often linked to Dravet syndrome, a severe form of epilepsy that starts in infancy and is often accompanied by developmental delays and other complications. However, different types of mutations in SCN1A, often missense mutations that can sometimes lead to a gain of function, can cause milder forms of epilepsy, like genetic epilepsy with febrile seizures plus. So, the type of mutation in the same gene can drastically change the outcome. Potassium channel genes, like KCNQ2 on chromosome 20q.33, are also key players. These channels help neurons return to their resting state after firing. Mutations in KCNQ2 can lead to benign familial neonatal epilepsy, BFNE, a relatively mild form of epilepsy that often resolves in the first year of life. However, other mutations in potassium channel genes can cause more severe, refractory, drug-resistant forms of epilepsy. Calcium channel genes, such as Cassine-1A on chromosome 19p13, control the flow of calcium ions, which are involved in neurotransmitter release and neuronal firing patterns. Pathogenic variants in CACNA1A can cause a spectrum of neurological disorders, including epileptic encephalopathy, ataxia, problems with coordination, and cognitive impairment, with the severity often depending on how the mutation affects the channel's function. What's also important to remember is that it's not just about the single mutated gene. Our overall genetic background, the other genes we have, can influence how a particular ion channel mutation plays out. Think of it like different instruments in an orchestra. If one instrument is off-key, the mutated ion channel, the overall sound, the clinical phenotype, can vary depending on how the other instruments, other genes, are playing. And it's not just genetics. Environmental factors, like fever or brain injury, can sometimes interact with these underlying genetic vulnerabilities and influence when and how epilepsy presents. So the world of ion channel mutations in epilepsy is incredibly complex. It's a story of tiny molecular changes with potentially huge consequences, and the specific outcome depends on a delicate interplay of the affected gene, the type of mutation, our other genes, and sometimes even the environment we live in.
All right, we've peeked into the genetic wiring of epilepsy, but what did it actually look like for Emperor Ferdinand I? And how do we even begin to understand it now? Back in Ferdinand's day, watching someone have an epileptic seizure must have been incredibly frightening and baffling. People often attributed them to all sorts of things: divine punishment, evil spirits, you name it. For Ferdinand, we know he suffered from severe epileptic seizures starting in childhood. These weren't just little flickers. Historical accounts suggest he had frequent, powerful grand mal seizures where he'd lose consciousness, convulse, and afterwards he'd often be totally exhausted and confused, a state we now call the post-ictal phase. Imagine trying to rule an empire with that hanging over your head. Fast forward to today, and while epilepsy is still a complex condition, our understanding has leapt light years ahead. We don't rely on guesswork anymore. Diagnosing epilepsy today is a careful process. Doctors look at a person's clinical history, what kind of seizures they've had, how often, what triggers them. Epilepsy isn't just one thing. It's a neurological disorder that can manifest in a huge variety of ways, affecting both the physical and cognitive functions of an individual. The core feature, of course, is recurrent, unprovoked seizures. But the experience of epilepsy goes far beyond just these events. The seizure itself can take many forms. Some people might experience involuntary twitching or tremors in a part of their body, while others might have a stiffening of their muscles. Consciousness can be impaired or lost entirely during a seizure. Some individuals might also have strange sensory experiences beforehand, like a feeling of déjà vu. The type of seizure a person has depends on which part of the brain is affected by the abnormal electrical activity. Epilepsy isn't just about what happens during a seizure. Many people with epilepsy experience significant cognitive symptoms as well. These can include confusion, difficulty finding words or talking, problems with memory, and feelings of dizziness or lightheadedness. What's really tough for many individuals is how these cognitive issues can persist even between seizures, impacting their daily lives and their ability to work or study. And the challenges don't stop there. The time after a seizure, known as the post-ictal period, people might experience feelings of depression and anxiety, sometimes even more intensely than they do between seizures. Psychotic symptoms can occur in some cases, as can periods of elevated mood or energy called hypomania. Many also report neurovegetative symptoms like changes in sleep or appetite, and overwhelming fatigue. Doctors use cool tech like an EEG, which is basically recording the brain's electrical whispers, to see if there are any unusual patterns. An MRI scan can also give them a detailed picture of the brain structure, checking for any physical abnormalities. And, of course, with our Decoding Dynasty hats on, genetic testing can be a big piece of the puzzle, identifying specific DNA changes that might make someone more prone to seizures. Now, for treatment, Ferdinand didn't have much beyond rest and perhaps some dubious old remedies. But today, the game has changed. While there's generally no cure for epilepsy, there are many ways to manage it effectively. The most common approach is anti-epileptic medications, or AEDs. These aren't magic pills that make it disappear, but they're brilliant at helping to control and reduce the frequency of seizures for many people. For those whose seizures are really tough to control, sometimes doctors might consider surgery to remove the tiny part of the brain causing the trouble, or other advanced therapies like vagus nerve stimulation, which is like a little pacemaker for the brain. Lifestyle adjustments, like getting enough sleep and avoiding triggers, also play a huge role. So, while Ferdinand bravely lived with his epilepsy largely unmanaged, modern science offers hope and significantly better quality of life for millions affected by this condition today. It's a powerful reminder of how far medical understanding has come.
All right, future genetic detectives. Before we wrap up today's deep dive, I've got a little teaser for you. This episode has been all about Emperor Ferdinand I and the fascinating complexities of epilepsy. But Ferdinand's health story is so rich, we're actually going to dedicate another whole episode to him. Next time on Decoding Dynasty, we're tackling his other major medical mystery, hydrocephalus. Get ready to dive into the world of fluid in the brain and how it further impacted his remarkable yet challenging life. Now, back to today's mission. We've just wrapped up our exploration into the complex world of epilepsy, specifically as it might have affected Emperor Ferdinand I. We've talked about those tricky ion channels, the wild variety of seizures, and how sometimes it's all just wired into our genes. It's truly amazing how much our DNA can influence our experiences, isn't it? Ferdinand's story, with his frequent seizures, really makes you stop and think about what life was like for him back then, dealing with a condition that was barely understood. It certainly paints a more personal picture of a man often seen through the lens of history books. Thanks a bunch for joining me on this genetic detective mission. If you found this episode as intriguing as I did, hit that like button, subscribe, and definitely share it with anyone who loves a good historical mystery with a scientific twist.